Hello like-minded people, it has been a while since the previous video and I'm glad to present you part 7 of how to create a horror game. It's a lesson dedicated to animation stage, which is shaped out to be applicable in Unity. Today we will consider many things, amongst which will be the facial rigging, animating emotions, we will carefully disassemble walk-cycle principles part by part, learning to make correct curves and looping your clips in general. We will have a look at the rotation principles and we'll learn to bake ambient occlusion onto the textures. Due to the requests from many of my viewers, I will share with you the correct approach of how to project the diffuse from one model onto the texture of another. I will show you how to achieve it without any artifacts. It, indeed, has several tricks to it. My name is Igor Aherne, and I'm very happy to see you here. Let's get going, friends. Quite a few people messaged me since the previous tutorial, part 6, where I vaguely mentioned the fact that I've projected my diffuse texture from a higher polygon representation of the mesh to a lower one. Here, because of that, today I will explain it in greater detail, as well as show you a couple of bonus things to ensure that you avoid all the potential mistakes that can be lying on your way. It was the moment where we had two different UV layouts, one of the high polygon object and another one of low poly, the retopologized version one. So two UVs, and we have a polypaint for a higher polygon representation model, but we haven't got a version for a low poly version. Obviously we can't stick a polypaint into a lower polygons version UV layout, because the polypaint will not fit. We have to do a projection. That is, let's ensure that we have our high polygon model in our workspace. I have it here. And also, if I unhide my selection or exit the isolate selection mode, you will see that I have a retopologized version right on top of that. The low poly one is called Mutant Low Head, and the higher one is called ZBrush Default Group. We can rename it to Mutant High. But let's wait with the projection, and I want to show you one bonus thing that you can do. First of all, let's select our Mutant High and isolate it from anything else, because we're going to be working with it and its texture. I have a material with a texture for a high version assigned into Diffuse, and the material is applied to this object. If we go into Render Setup and pick from the renderer in the Command tab where it says Assign Renderer, if we pick Mental Ray by NVIDIA, then go into Indirect Illumination and increase the FG Precision presets all the way to high. If you want to, you can do it very high, but I'm doing high. Assign a simple plain white material to this model and ensure that in the environment, press 8 to access it. The background color is white and the tint is at 0, white as well. Always when working with textures, make sure that you are working in logarithmic exposure control, and also make sure that you are working only with Mental Ray renderer. Make sure that the brightness is the same, and if you're going to be projecting the texture for your body, which is in my case in a separate scene, make sure that the brightness stays the same and that those settings stay unchanged as I'm changing the scenes. Also, a very interesting setting which not many people know about is hiding in rendering gamma LUT setup. You might want to disable this option to remove the correction that 3ds Max provides by default. I'm gonna leave it on. Now we can press 0 and we're gonna see the window that we are familiar with from the tutorial number 3. But right now we're not gonna be doing any kind of projection of normals. I want to show you how you can bake the ambient occlusion to further improve the quality of the texture for our high head, the polypaint one. Let's select our high head. We don't need projection mapping. We have to have a tick right here. Use existing channel, do not automatically unwrap. In the output, let's add ambient occlusion Mental Ray, which is only going to be available if you have Mental Ray renderer set up in the renderer setup tab. Let's add our ambient occlusion Mental Ray. Enable here, export it as a JPEG somewhere in the folder to which your character belongs. I will name this one as Mutant Ambient Occlusion. We'll save it as a JPEG at the maximum settings. We don't care about the size right now because this is still improving the higher polygon representation model. I will do 248 by 248. The samples should be 16, and you can play with the spread, maximum distance and fall off to further improve or reduce the quality of ambient occlusion, adjust its settings as you wish. Because target map slot will be diffuse color, after we baked our ambient occlusion map, we will see it here on the model, although it's not going to be anywhere in the diffuse slot on the current material. It's just for a revision purpose, a preview. When you're ready, you can click render. However, in my case, I've noticed that I didn't change the color of my material. It shouldn't be gray, but white. Just for the sake of the example, I will reduce the FG precision presets down to low, and we'll click render. Computing the final gather points simply refines the picture part by part, and then it's baked on top of that, basically rendered. That way we get a refined texture at the end. When the rendering has finished, you can see the results in the viewport. Don't mind this picture. It's already saved in our folder, let's close it, and observe the changes that happened here. You can see that all the cavities have been shaded out, and it looks much better now. It has some volume to it. All the details are basically outlined. When combined with simple diffuse texture, this will give great results, and the model will look a step higher when imported into Unity and is ready to be used and looked at. Such lighting, of course, is not possible in game engines at runtime because it takes so much time, and you could have seen how much time it took me just to render this image. About 5 minutes. Such type of lighting is not supported by Unity or any other kind of gaming package. This type is called ray tracing. And because of that we have to pre-bake the lighting and pre-bake the shading onto the model. Here is how it looks in reality. That's our unwrapped model and unwrapped texture that fits into the high polygon model's UV layout, the first one. Let's go into Photoshop and see how we can improve its texture. I will drag the texture into the Photoshop. Let's right click, make a layer from background. Let's call this one Diffuse. Press Ctrl+Shift+N and create a new one called Ambient Occlusion. In here I'll drag our mutant AO tint and we'll press enter to confirm the change. Let's rasterize the layer and we'll set the type to multiply. After this I'll reduce opacity downwards to be somewhat lower. You can also use overlay. Play with the settings until you find the one that you like. However, make sure to use it both here for the head and for the body, because you want to have similar results which do not look disjoint and look like they are made from one single piece. When you're happy with what you have, let's press Ctrl+Shift+S and save it as a JPEG, as a texture that will be fitted onto the high polygon version of the model. It should be a high quality because we're not going to be using it in-game anyways, and we want to have the best results when baking. Let's apply a different material to this creature, or to its head. For the diffuse color, let's pick bitmap, go to the folder with our mutant, and apply a texture that we've just created a second ago. Make sure that show in viewport is ticked. If the texture is not strong enough in terms of shadows, you might want to return back to the Photoshop and tweak the settings further. Press Ctrl+Shift+S and override this file that you've saved a moment ago. When we go into 3ds Max, it's going to be updated. It's time to make a projection from a higher representation of the model to a lower one, in order to transform this ambient occlusion polypaint texture from this UV layout into another UV layout of our retopologized version. By the way, let's unhide it, so I'll press Alt-Q to exit the isolate selection mode. We'll pick it, that is, mutant low head shall be selected. I will apply a third material to it, the one that we haven't been working with. We'll go into render to texture. With my retopologized version of the model selected, the following settings in the render to texture dialog should be considered. Projection mapping should be turned on. We need to pick the mutant high version of the model, just as if we would be working in tutorial number 3 when doing projection for normal maps. We're going to reduce the cage down to 0 via percentage, and then push out the amount slightly more. If you want, you can work in shaded mode. Make sure that none of the high geometry is protruding from our cage. So either press 1 and then alter the position of each vertex, or increase the amount of cage to be bigger. You can also work with the soft selection as explained in previous tutorial number 3. I'm just gonna do bigger cage because I don't have time to show everything, and you're already familiar with this process. You want to use existing channel of the selected retopologized model. Do not use automatic unwrap. In the output section, you want to add a diffuse map. Save it as a JPEG in the appropriate folder. For preview, make it a diffuse color slot. Change the size to the one that you want. I'm going to use 1024 because that's the one I'm using in the game. And this texture is the one that will be sticking on further. Make sure to set it to an appropriate size. You also might want to play with the options settings, where you do ray mist check, or you can even turn it off if you want to. All of those options have been discussed once again in lesson number 3. In order to have a successful bake, make sure that you are working in render setup in common settings, make sure that you've picked NVIDIA Mental Ray renderer. Make sure that there are no lights in the scene, no hidden or isolated ones. Ensure that when you press 8 and go into environment settings, that you have logarithmic exposure control set, that the brightness is the same as in the other scenes, and all of the settings nearby are the same as well. And also you might want to go into rendering, gamma LUT setup, and turn off enable gamma LUT correction. After this has been done, you can go ahead and press render, and this will bake the texture from a high polygon representation to the UV layout of a retopologized versions model, effectively creating a second texture that will fit into this second UV layout and that can be used in games. As you can see, because my cage was not perfect and some of the geometry was protruding from our cage, there is some of the ray mist check color, and we might want to check the cage at this part. And also after this, if you want to use specular maps, make sure to roll back to the previous tutorial and check how to do this by erasing parts of your texture, playing with the opacity, so that it can shine in Unity under light in appropriate areas. And that is how you bake the diffuse. In computer games, the facial animation is very important. However, not many tutorials nowadays explain how to import such animation into Unity. Common practice in 3ds Max has been to morph between different states, different faces, which contain different facial expressions. Morph is just another modifier in 3ds Max, which allows you to accomplish this task. However, our game engine, Unity, only relies on bones, and we can only manipulate the vertices of the mesh via altering the bones which control it. Morphing does not mention bones, and you would require to do a so-called point cage, where you would be storing positions of all the vertices across your time span. But Unity does not provide such alternative, and it does not support point caching unless you install external scripts. I'm not a fan of using somebody else's work, especially for this tutorial series, so we will create our own custom face rig. Because this is not a main character and a secondary one, we won't be seeing him a lot, so facial expression in here is not very important. However, it should still be expressive, and you should be able to tell what the character is feeling or what his intentions are. For example, to create this roaring animation where he's going "Bah!" and roars at you, you will require 7 bones. We will not make use of anything else other than IK and simple linkage to the controllers, by dragging which we will be able to move several of the virtual muscles. Because this mesh will have bones, Unity will be able to recognize it, and we will be able to animate this mesh, create different facial expressions which will be supported by and can be viewed in Unity. As well as that, we will be able to make full use of animation mixing. We will be able to animate brows, open or close mouth, different position of cheek muscles, blend them all together, and then use those animations, those separate animation files, to create further animations, and more complex ones. However, right now our focus is to create a face rig. If you recall, our face mesh was linked to the bone, to the head bone. However, now we're gonna stick skin modifier onto it, and then animate it from several bones. The bone's position will be as follows: one for the forehead, one for the eyebrow, one for the upper cheek, one for the lower one. And then the same stuff happens on the other side, making it a total of 7 bones. Actually, it should be 8 bones, of course, because I forgot to mention that there is a jawbone. By moving the jawbone, we'll be raising or lowering the bottom part, the jaw part, this one. There is nothing special in creating those bones. You are already familiar with all the techniques explained in previous part, but this one should be created in the front view, zoom up closer on the head, and actually, let's select our body, hide the selection. From the front view we can create bones for our eyebrows, which are somewhere here, the lower cheek, right click to end, and the forehead. From the left representation, let's create our jawbone, which should originate somewhere from here. Let's select its base, go into perspective mode, and align it with our head. Not in Z and not in Y, just in X. Those 3 bones I will align with the head, just in Y. And then I'll bring them forwards. The forehead one can be tilted along the X-axis, so that it's aligned with the forehead in a better way. I'm doing this from the world representation. From the world representation, I will also rotate the eyebrow bone around the Z-axis. However, notice that I'm not rotating anything in the X. This would be incorrect, and we wouldn't be able to achieve correct rotation after we've applied our IK chains. So don't rotate backwards and forwards. This rotation is incorrect. You can only rotate like this, inwards and outwards, and also around clockwise and counterclockwise in the world representation. You also want to go into the side view. For me, it's the right one. Check that this line is not diagonal like it is right now. It has to be straight. So using the world representation and without the angle snap, so press A if it's turned on, without it, let's make it straight as possible. The same applies to other bones. We can now go into perspective mode. I will select the upper cheekbone along with its ending, press W, hold Shift and drag it down to make a copy for our lower cheek. Go into animation, bone tools, and of course, if you don't like the length of this bone, of this newly created bone, you can select it, go into bone edit mode, and only from the local representation, resize it in the Y-X plane. You can also move it closer to the face in the Z representation as well. Go downwards here, select both of the bones that you've been rescaling, press Reset Stretch, Reset Scale, and go out of bone edit mode. Let's select our 3 chains of bones, then mirror them to the other side. All we have to do is press mirror and adjust the offset or press OK. Do it manually from the world representation like this. Now we have to go through a rather tedious work of renaming them, but you can't avoid it, so we gotta do it. Following this convention, I will call this one Mutant Left Upper Cheek. We'll copy its name into the buffer, go into its ending, and paste this name, as well as add underscore end. Repeat this process for other bones. After this has been done, let's apply IK solvers to each of our bone chains. Let's also straight away rescale our IK goals because they are too big. Make sure that you are doing this in a uniform scale. If it's different, press and hold to select the top option. You don't need an IK solver for the forehead, but you need one for the jawbone, if you want to manipulate jaw by moving the controller. If you want to do it by rotation, you won't require an IK controller right here. We are adding those IK solvers just so that we can move the ending of the bone and the base as well. This gives us a very flexible range of motions, and we can raise the bone at just one or the other side. This wouldn't be possible without the IK chain, because as soon as we would attempt to raise the rear end of the main parent, this would bring the whole chain upwards, including the child. However, now because of the IK solver, the child is glued in place, and we can change the position of the main parent, as well as change the position of the child, which is very nice. If you want to be very precise and neat, you will also have to rename your IK goals, those crosses that you have been resizing. However, I'm not gonna bother with it. Let's go into Create, go into Helpers, Point Helper, and from the front representation, press F on your keyboard. Let's create 3 helpers here, and you can change their size in here. 1 helper in the center, 1 helper right here, and also 3 on this side as well. You will also need 3 helpers in the center. You don't have to be precise at this stage, because in a second, actually right now, we're gonna be aligning them properly. You can also rename those controllers, the helpers. Once again, I'm not gonna bother with this. Let's go into Align, and align this one to the IK goal in all three positions, but not in orientation. Let's do the center to center just for the sake of saving time, since we'll be doing center slightly later as well. So right now we're just applying their position to match of their respectful IK goal that they will be controlling later. The middle controllers, those three ones, have to be aligned with the head only in X position. You can now align other controllers to this previous one, just in the X position, or to the head, whatever is easier for you. For the forehead controller, we can click on the main parent bone for the forehead, center to center, in X, Y, and Z. Press OK. For the jaw, its helper can be aligned with the IK chain for the jaw, in all three positions. If we look now from the side, you will see that those three controllers are not aligned with the face. That's just because we were aligning them only in X position, just so that they are centered to the face. We can then select them and then align them manually by hand so that they sit on the surface of the head, like this. You want to have their centers somewhere in between of their bones. For instance, this nose controller should be between the rear ends of those two main parents. At least visually. You can also adjust them in Z, but don't touch X, because that's what we've been aligning. When all seems good, we can now link them. We will link the rear ends or the main parents of our chains. For instance, the lower cheek to the lower cheek controller, both of them at once. The upper cheek should be aligned to the nose controller. The main parents for the eyebrows should be linked at once to their eyebrow controller. The forehead controller, the one which doesn't have the IK chain, the main parent should be linked to its helper. And actually, the forehead can be without ending, so let's select it and press delete. Once again, endings are only required if you will be doing some kind of chains, the IK chains or something else similar to that. We now need to link each of the IK goals to the helper. So let's do it now, to the respectful helper like this, including the IK goal for the jaw, don't forget about it. Finally, all of the helpers can be linked to the head bone. Let's pick all of the helpers and link them to the head bone. Due to this, as we rotate our head controller, it will be moving the helpers to which our bones are linked. Let's double-click on our head bone to select everything that it controls. Because the rest of our figure is in its 0th transform position, which happens if you alt-right-click and transform everything to 0. Because everything of the body is in this state, we can also freeze the transforms on the selected controllers, but we don't require the bone to be selected, so I'll alt-left-click to deselect it. We only need the newly created bones and the helpers. So alt-right-click, freeze the transform. It's now just a matter of scanning our bones to the face, and to do this, let's select the main parents of our chains, don't include the endings, don't touch the helpers, and don't touch the IK goals. Remember to select the jawbone, and we can create a selection. Let's call it 1, for example. That's not a very convenient name, so you might go for a face or whatever. I'm just going to name it 1. Now we can select our head, go into the modify panel. From the modifier, let's select skin and add our selection number 1. Also add a head bone. With it selected, let's go into edit envelopes, tick the vertices, go into display and click show no envelopes. For the bone effect limit, set only 4. That means that each vertex can be affected by maximum of 4 bones. Exactly what Unity allows us to do. We cannot go above 4, however we can go below, but in our case 4 is the required minimum. Let's press Ctrl A to select all of the vertices for this head bone and set the absolute effect exactly to 1. Let's quickly exit edit envelopes and animate our controllers. I'll select 2 end helpers on my eyebrows, we'll press N, and on frame 20 we'll raise them upwards like this, and the center one I'll bring it down. For the center one, I'll bring it downwards, and for its side ones, I'll select them and bring them upwards in the Z-axis. For the one below, I'll also bring it downwards, and the other 2 are gonna be brought downwards as well, by a tiny amount. For the jawbone, or the jaw helper, I'll move it backwards like this. Now let's select all of our controllers, the helpers, duplicate the beginning key to the end. We can now select our face, and for example, let's start with the jawbone. Let's click Edit Envelopes, and with my kinky selection, my favorite one, I'm going to select all the vertices that this jawbone should control. Again, it's just a revision from previous tutorial, so nothing special. I will also adjust some of the tension for those vertices towards this bone to be slightly bigger, and maybe those ones, let's see. I'm not touching any upper teeth because they should not be affected by this lower jawbone. They are stuck to the top part of the face. Go into the front mode, and then pick this bone, the left eyebrow. Go into less exaggerated situation, which is for example frame 0, and select the vertices which should be tied to this eyebrow bone. I will select those ones and will add absolute effect towards it. I'm playing animation by pressing leftwards and rightwards button, which are the ones after B and M. Next two buttons allow you to scrub the animation leftwards or rightwards, and that's what I'm doing right now. So I can hover my mouse here and not bother about moving this time slider by hand. I can do this on the keyboard, which is very handy. If some of the bones are on your way, we can exit Edit Envelopes, and with our head selected we can press Alt-Q. It's actually much better, because now we can edit envelopes and we still see the representation of the bones that are controlling this face, although they are currently not visible. Let's not touch the middle line right now, we will leave it for later. We need several facial expressions in order to be able to tell that our skinning is perfect, because it might look nice and correct as we complete this facial expression, but when he is happy, for example, or sad, the vertices might be displaced in a wrong order. So you'll have to reposition your bones more than once and create several expressions and perhaps blend using 2 or more for a better precision. Just like explained before, you have to worry about preserving the loops and the nice flow of the curves. When this is achieved, your skinning will be closer to a more correct version. In my case, notice that my geometry is quite deformed by default, so my loops are not going to be as perfect as in the case when working with a human character, for example, or human face. This head has so many dents, wounds, the surface is very rigid. Notice how the weight is spread for this eyebrow bone. It should be something similar to you as well. My character does not have the eyeballs, that's why I will have to worry about deforming the inner part of the sockets as well. Let's now work on the upper cheek. As you could have seen a second ago, I mirrored my vertices from the blue side to the green one with a bigger mirror threshold than it was set by default. Let's now focus on the middle parts. Because the vertices in the middle are all bound to be carried by the head bone, we now need to add 2 more bones that are lying on the sides of the vertex that should be controlled by them. For instance, this one. Let's go down into the weight tool dialog, and we can see that mutant head bone is currently controlling it with 100% strength. With this bone selected, let's set weight of 0.5. And with this one selected, let's set a weight of 0.333. Click set weight. The similar stuff happens for all other bones. This vertex has to be controlled by the head bone, the lower cheek bones, and the upper cheek bones. However, remember that we have our bone effect limit only set to be 4. That's why we will only tie it between the head bone, which is very important, and the upper cheekbones. We say no to the lower cheekbones, because we can't afford to have them. First of all, make sure that all 3 bones have the equal influence on this vertex, and then depending on the situation, adjust main head's bone strength towards this vertex to be downwards, or maybe increase it. Now for the forehead bone, we will have to add its own area of influence, which is also very important, because it adds greatly to the expression of the face. Add a horizontal line or horizontal span or the area of vertices. Let's set them to be higher, something like 0.8. And because we forgot to animate this forehead controller, let's quickly exit edit envelopes, exit the isolate selection mode by pressing Alt Q once again. Going to the 20th frame with auto key turned on, let's bring it downwards. In my case, the gizmos were hidden, so I have to press X or Control Shift X or maybe Control X on 3ds Max 2014. And it's also too small, so I'll press plus on my keyboard to increase it. Then I'll bring it downwards and slightly forwards. I can then select the first key and move it to the end. Then I need to select my head bone, press Alt Q to go back into the isolate selection mode, to be able to edit envelopes even further. Here is one important thing, because our bones are being rotated by the controller right here, and also one at this position right there, the bone is being raised upwards like this. That causes the whole area of vertices to be shifted up around the bone, but we can pressure them downwards using the influence of this bone, the forehead. So if you can see big spikes of the vertices and the loops are suddenly going up like this, that means you can grab this vertex and assign a bigger value to the forehead in order to bring it down along with the forehead controller or the bone. That's exactly what I did a second ago. So as told before, you will ultimately have to create a couple of more facial expressions with the settings that you have currently, polish them even more by adjusting the weights for the vertices and the bones according to other expressions, for example, confusion, happiness, or sadness. A step that we'll take in a second is very important. You must create a proper selection set for your files from which you will be creating animations. Having finished rigging our character, we will be creating different animation files that originate from this one. And before that, we need to create a selection set for our bones and the geometry that will be exported when we are ready to move it into Unity stage. For that, let's exit the isolate selection mode, make sure that the display bones selection filter is the only one turned on, and then pick everything that's the bone, not the ending, not the IK, and not the FK bones. We only need the normal bones. If you make a mistake here, it's not the end of the world, but make sure that you select all of the bones properly, because it will simplify your life a lot at later stages. Export everything, including the facial bones. That is very important. You don't need to select the controllers, nor don't you need to select the IK chains and the IK goals or the shapes. You don't require all of that stuff. Just the bones and then later the geometry. Double check that your selection is proper, that it has no endings, doesn't include any kind of IK or FK bones. Make sure that you've also didn't miss anything as well. Make sure to select geometry and pick all of the chest bones, as well as the head and the body, our mesh of the creature. That is, select the chest bones and the roll bones as well. Press OK and create a selection set called Figure Export. Press Enter to confirm. Now, when you're required to select it, all you have to do is press H, and from the selection set, pick your Figure Export selection. However, that's not everything. Sometimes our bones can protrude the geometry, and as we export them in Unity, they will be seen sticking out from the body. That's not really nice, and because of that, I'll show you how to dispose of the geometry, but preserve them in place. That only applies for the bones that are geometrical pieces, the ones that we used previously, just for your sake of seeing how it can work. Let's go into the wireframe mode. For instance, you see that this roll bone, the shoulder one, is a cylinder. In order to dispose of its vertices, but to keep its transform preserved, and therefore not to alter the structure of the skeleton, simply go into the second panel right here, into Editable Poly, go into the vertex level, and press Ctrl A, then Delete. That got rid of all the vertices, all of the visible geometry and all of the polygons, and now you are just left with one single empty object, if you will. We didn't change any of the transform parameters, we just got rid of the geometry. You can repeat this process for everything, including the roll bones on the other side, the wrist and the chest bones as well, before you export your geometry. After this has been done, let's save our work. Let's save this one in the folder of your character, under the file that has just its name. For instance, Mutant. As you are ready to work with the animations, let's save this one inside of the animations folder, under a name Mutant @walk-cyle. And then create a walk-cyle out of this state. Any further animations that you want to create, in order to do that, you'll have to return to your Mutant file and then save it under a different name to create a copy or shift a copy out of Mutant file to create a further animations. That will have your selection sets preserved, and you'll be always starting from the empty and clean canvas. Right now it's very important to understand how the rotation occurs. The way we've set up our figure in previous part is kind of bound to give us slight problems, so before we start to animate anything, we need to adjust the whole figure a little bit. Speaking of which, I only mean the controllers. The bones are adjusted correctly and the links are tied properly. It is this shoulder controller to worry about and the opposite one. Let's select both of them and press Alt-Q to isolate the selection. We are automatically centered between them, so we can rotate around and have a look at them more closely. R and L stand for right and left. Notice in which mode I'm gonna be selecting them. It's the local mode, so when I'm selecting an object, its axes are gonna be aligned with the object's pivot. For example, if I press W and switch into select and move mode, you may spot that we need to readjust the gimbal into the local representation of the axis, because it's unique to each of the selection modes. Let's pick this object and observe how the axes are aligned. With the current representation of axes, the local ones, the x-axis is tilted slightly in the horizontal direction, and the whole pivot axes are rotated a little bit counterclockwise for this object. This is totally fine because their pivots are aligned with the rotation of the pivots of the bones that are positioned like this, in that direction. However, for the arms specifically, the axis should be positioned in a different way. This is a local representation of the axis. If I switch to the third panel right here, the hierarchy, effect pivot only, you can compare that indeed everything is lined up perfectly. Let me switch this off, then switch into local, select and rotate option by pressing E or clicking here. Observe how the axis changed. Each one surrounds its appropriate axis, so for example X was looking to the left, outside of the screen, and now it's surrounded by the red line. The z-axis was looking upwards and it was blue. It's also surrounded by the blue circle, which is currently being yellow because it's selected. Here it is. And finally the y-axis is looking to the right outwards from the screen, which is also having a handle, the green line, also surrounding the green y-axis like this. This is fine, but in our structure is going to be giving us problems later on when we try to animate. The gimbal lock will occur as we animate the arms. Let me unhide the figure to demonstrate this problem. Right now the figure is positioned in a T-pose and acting correctly, but let's say we want to animate the swing in the shoulder area. Let's press N and enter the auto key. On frame 0 bring the arm downwards like so. Perhaps rotate it backwards a little bit in the Z-axis, the local axis. Now let's bring the counter to frame 10, then bring the arm forward like so. It appears that we animated the arm only in the Z-axis, but what's happening at the background is that rotation occurs in the gimbal representation. Computer interprets it differently. It figured out that this is the starting frame and this is the final frame, so it tried to interpolate the rotation along all of those frames, the ones in between 1 and 2. To us it appears that it only should rotate in the Z-axis, but this is something that computer could not predict. It's using different transformation methods, and we will see how we can tame them a little bit with a strategy that's going to be explained to you further on. Let's scroll backwards. So observe how the arm rotates incorrectly. It should rotate like this, straight, but when we scrub the animation, notice how it goes inwards as it approaches the final destination. It goes inwards like this, resulting in an arc like so. While in reality we asked it to do a straight line like this. When animating characters or objects for games or films, whatever, you should always be animating not in local, but in gimbal. Select our controller, Alt-right click and transform to 0. We need to pick both of the controllers and then isolate the selection. Currently we are observing them in the gimbal representation with having select and rotate regime turned on. This is the initial position of controllers or initial transform because we did not move them anywhere, they are just rotated. That's how the arms were kept in the T-pose, and as we rotate our controllers, then the arms would be lowered or raised upwards. Any kind of rotation the computer does to the object is done via the gimbal representation. This is the common principle along which most of the rotations occur in game engines and 3ds Max as well. That's a gizmo which has 3 axes available for us to rotate: the Y, the X and the Z. Notice that the Z1 is the carrying axis that has been slightly touched in the previous tutorial when we were creating the rig for our character, and it carries all other 2 axes, Y and X. The Y-axis does not touch the Z1 because it's being carried by Z, however it's affecting X. That's where the gimbal lock is occurring, when the X and the Z overlap. If we are in local representation of the axis, we can still rotate visually, forwards and backwards. However, in reality, if we try to interpolate between the starting frame and the final one, the computer will do some weird transformation. Back in gimbal, you can see that when the X and the Z are aligned, in order to do it, the computer will have to first bring the X-axis upwards like so, to have some kind of ability to rotate at least visually frontwards and backwards, and then bring it backwards like so again. So that's why you see the object tilting upwards and downwards and the arm actually being squeezed into the body as we try to interpolate between point A and point B. In order not to have this problem in our structure, or at least have it hidden, we need to rotate this thing by 90 degrees, like so. Notice that if we try to bring the arm downwards, now it's going to be happening not in Y-axis, but in X. So we bring it downwards. X is the child of everything, it does not affect other 2 axes. We brought our arm downwards by 90 degrees, and now it's going to be looking downwards, like so, the whole structure, but we still have the ability to rotate forwards and backwards. We will do this in the Y-axis, and yes, it will affect the X, but we will not care about the X, since if the arm is raised upwards like so, and now it's looking straight at us, sticking from your screen. Yes, we lost the ability to rotate it clockwise and counterclockwise, but we do not need this rotation around the joint that is being controlled by this controller. We can do this pronation and supination motion by using our wrist controllers, right? So the idea was to rotate this controller by 90 degrees. However, we cannot do this right now because that's gonna alter our structure that we've prepared before. Let's exit our isolate figure mode, Control Z everything, and perhaps maybe Alt right click transform to 0 our controllers. If you recall, our structure is kinda intricate because there are several of the controllers which depend on the other ones. For instance, this one, the elbow controller, is being linked to its parent, the shoulder controller. And the same story happens on the other side. Also, this controller is affecting the rotation of the bone next to it, that one. And the same story happens here. This bone is being affected as well. It is so because the bone has an orientation constraint, and it is only the red bone which has it. So let's select the red FK bone, this one, and following the principle of previous tutorial, go into motion, rotation, then delete orientation target, which is currently our controller for the right arm right here. Repeat the same thing for the left side as well. Select the left FK arm bone and delete orientation target. You'll see some kind of snap that's gonna occur, but don't worry, it's gonna be fixed later on and the arm is gonna return back to the position. Let's also select the elbow controllers, those two ones, then click unlink the selection. This breaks the link between the parent and the child. However, all the other controllers are still linked to this one. So we just got rid of this link. Now we can safely manipulate this controller because it no longer affects the rotation of the bone and nothing is linked to it and will not be translated around the axis of this controller. Let's grab this one and that one, Alt Q to isolate the selection once again, and then let's have a look at what happens in the gimbal representation currently. Notice an interesting thing. If we switch into hierarchy, affect pivot only, if we go into the front representation of the axis, you will observe that the pivot point is slightly tilted. Let's go into the world representation, then zero everything out. Now the pivot is completely and perfectly aligned with the world's axis. Let's exit affect pivot only regime. Because we've aligned our pivot to the world, you would think that in the gimbal representation of the axis, the rotational axis would be perfectly aligned like they are right now. Let's switch from the world into gimbal and see what happens. Notice a slant in the Z-axis. But how is this possible, you might say? You could have thought that having aligned our pivot to world, in gimbal representation the axis should be aligned to world as well. Because aren't they working from the pivot? No, they are not. They are working from the frozen transform. So for now let's roll back our actions and have the pivot aligned as it was before. It was aligned according to the rotation of the arm bone, so it should stay that way. I just wanted to show you that the gimbal representation of the axis is not going to be zeroed out if we try to zero out the pivot and align it to the world. You can align the gimbal axis to the pivot. To do this, we only need to Alt right click and freeze the rotation. Now the gimbal axis are aligned with the pivot, so we can perform the rotation, the 90 degrees rotation around the Z axis. And I'll rotate camera a little bit in perspective mode so that you can see what we're doing. With the angle snap turned on, so press A for that, let's rotate it by 90 degrees. Let's do the same thing with the other controller. Pick it, center it by pressing Z. With the angle snap turned on, let's rotate it by 90 degrees as well, but before that let's Alt right click, freeze rotation, then rotate everything by 90 degrees. It's a very interesting relation which might be kind of difficult for you to understand straight away, but basically the gimbal representation, pivot point and the frozen transform are the three things that have to be united together in your mind. Now because we rotated our pivot points of the controllers, when we bring our arm downwards by 90 degrees like so, it's gonna happen in the x-axis. We can then allow computer to rotate and swing the arm backwards and forwards along the y-axis, which will bring the x-axis downwards, but once again we don't need to do the rotation around this joint in the arm. The supination and pronation is gonna happen in the wrist area. Let's exit the isolate selection mode. Working on the right side, I will pick my right FK bone, go into the fourth panel, the motion, ensure that I'm in rotation and add orientation target for this bone to be this controller.
I will click Keep Initial Offset, and you can see that the elbow joint returned back to the pivot point of this controller for elbow. Let's right-click to exit the Add Orientation target, then repeat the process for the left side as well. Also keep in mind the problem that might occur. For example, you've selected the red bone and then pressed Unlink. Notice the anomaly that happened to your creature. Try to avoid this, and if it happened, simply press Ctrl Z. But remember to regularly save your work, because some changes might be permanent and you might screw something up. Let's select your controllers, freeze their transform, and now we can safely link our elbow joints to the main parent controllers. Freeze the transform, and let's see what we've achieved in the end. I will switch it to shapes only selection mode so that everything else, including geometry, bones, cameras, whatever you have, is going to be ignored, and I'll be only able to select shapes. So now I can only select the splines. At frame 0 with auto key, I'll grab this one, bring it downwards like so, and we'll bring the arm backwards. That's our first frame. At frame 10, let's make it swing forwards by rotating in the Z-axis, and I can press plus on my keyboard to increase the gizmos for rotation. Let's grab the first key and drag it to frame 20 so that the arm returns back. Notice that the gimbal lock has disappeared. Now the arm has resources to rotate forwards and backwards because it has the Z-axis available to it. And if we bring it backwards like so, by the smallest child, the X-axis, the X-axis will not rotate anything because it's dependent on other two axes, and we can rotate our arm forwards and backwards. However, in this position, as I told you before, there is no opportunity to rotate counterclockwise and clockwise, but this can be done using this controller. You can also raise your arm upwards, like so, and then you can still rotate in the Y-axis, the horizontal one, freely, like so. It is now possible for us to proceed and animate the walk cycle for this character.
In this lesson we'll see how we can create different animations. The most complex one you'll be faced with is the walk cycle, and then perhaps the run cycle can be created from that, but the walk cycle is the biggest challenge you'll face when animating the characters. That is because you have to create a perfect loop, which creates an illusion of character walking forwards, although he is staying in place. Having this animation, you can take it into the game engine in order to call it at certain time when the character is translating himself forwards, to the right, leftwards, backwards, etc. For the types of motions where the character has to translate himself in a three-dimensional space, you might want to create loops. The walk cycle is one of them. It's a fixed frame, for example 25 frame length animation, the last frame of which leads naturally into the first frame of the animation. So let's say we have 24 frames, and in the walk cycle the character has to do two steps, one with the right foot and then one with the left one. After this, our animation will jump back to start and the whole process will repeat again. In the game engine you can blend different animations. For example, you can create a clip of character waving his arm, walking, jumping, arching his back forwards and backwards, and maybe animations for face. Later in the game engine, you can mix those animations and combine them in different variations to create more complex animations out of those base blocks. Let's say we have a waving animation of character and also walking animation. If we then wanted to have a character waving his arm while walking, usually you would have to create a third animation where the character obviously walks and waves his arm as well. If we then decide that the character should also be running at some points, then having added this clip of running, we could have different states. We can have plain running, plain walking, plain waving of hand. We can have waving of hand while walking, or waving of hand while running. As you can see, the number of animation increases drastically as we throw more states and more loops into the range of clips that we'll be using. This is the problem to which Unity provides a solution with animation mixing. As I said before, we're going to create a first walk cycle, learn different things that we can do with the curve editor, and in particular the curves that it contains, and with that alter the parameters of the character. Having done a normal human-like walk cycle, we can then tweak around the creature to create something that resembles a zombie walk, for example this one. You can see he's doing some kind of grin as he's walking, trying to bite the air, and it's like he's tired and almost on all of his 4 feet, like an animal would be walking. So it's a scary monster walk. However, it originates from the normal walk cycle. And as you can see, I only have 23 frames, with the 24th one being the 0. That's exactly where the animation ends and jumps back to start to loop indefinitely. As well as doing animation mixing, later in Unity you can adjust the speed at which the animation plays, to create a slower walk cycle or to make it really fast. Unity will also provide something what's called animation blending, where the animations are taken and are kind of fading into each other. The last 3 or 4 frames, depending on the settings that you set, they will be overlapping between those two animations that you want to transfer between. And then the character will kind of smoothly transition into the next animation or the next loop and keep on playing it for as long as you want. Keep in mind that different poses might require different setup of the controllers, and the frozen transforms should be adjusted accordingly to avoid the gimbal lock that might occur if you bend this character forwards, for example, and want it to swing arms forwards and backwards. You might want to have to readjust and refreeze those controllers on the shoulders for it to act without any gimbal locks. So enough of talking, and let's see how we can do our first walk cycle. With that said, let's jump back to the place where we left off in the previous tutorial, to the completed rig of our mutant. The way we'll be working with him does not require us to have main rig drive controller. Let's select it, right click, hide the selection. The way in which we'll be working with this doll, or rig, is going to be via the controllers only. We're not going to be animating the body, nor we will be animating the bones. Because of that, let's go into the selection filter and pick shapes. That way, anything we click on the script is only going to be referring to the shapes. We can attempt to select bones and geometry, but we will fail. This working mode is very handy in our situation because we have so many controllers, geometry and bones in one place, but we only want to work with the first one. In order to prepare our character for the walking stance, let's bring the shoulder controllers downwards so that he's standing vertically and in a kind of relaxed pose. We'll be working on the arms progressively, but let's start working on the feet first. Press Ctrl Alt left mouse click on the timeline and drag it to the start. You want to have the 0th frame at the beginning and frame 23 at the end. Press Ctrl Alt right click, click on the time slider and drag the ending to be 23. That way the animation takes the length of 24 frames, because in order to proceed from the ending to the beginning, it still takes the time of 1 frame. The cycle will return back to the original state, and will loop again. If you didn't want to close the curve editor with it open, you could have gone here, and then set the beginning and the ending right here. We are going to be working in NTSC at the speed of a half, because 1 will be too quick, and 1/2 will allow us to see what's happening better. Now we have our working field set to be from 0 to 23, and just as in the case with dragging this thing right here, when working in the curve editor, you can drag the current time by clicking on this double yellow line and dragging it leftwards and rightwards. Graph editor is the tool that allows you to control the acceleration rates of different parameters, for example the parameters of transform, bending of the toes, fingers, etc. Having selected the right foot controller, we can see that it's displayed right here, sitting under the fold world. There are different folds above our selected object that correspond for the environment, anything you want to animate except for this object. However, this controller is exactly what we are worrying about right now, and it's displayed here. Anything below that is the child of this controller is what it has an influence on. Those parameters belong to the right foot controller. From 2 previous tutorials, you are already familiar with transform, the settings to which sit in the 4th panel right here under the rollout transform. Transform contains rotation and the settings for position and the scale. It also contains options which bind it between different boundaries and apply different distortions that determine the behavior of the object. As you can see, transform contains 3 children: position, rotation, and Bezier scale. Also, independent from the transform, but depending on the right foot controller, there is a modified object rollout, which contains the attribute holder with the different parameters for our foot. For example, the custom attributes, the toe tap, the toe lift, all the way down to knee swivel, including the heel with our 2 parameters. They can be accessed by going into the second modify panel, and you can see that the custom attributes panel is right here, containing 5 of our parameters, which is displayed right here, containing 5 of the parameters. Heel attributes are here, and it contains 2 parameters. Because we brought our arms downwards, we can select the controllers, save our work, then press Alt right click, freeze the transforms. Notice how in the gimbal representation the axes have flipped itself. The gimbal axes that way have been aligned with the current position of the pivot, and we can animate the arm swinging forwards and backwards freely from this state. In the case of another controller, we have a y-axis, which is still working properly. When you examine a character, a walking character, there are several stages that we should consider. However, there are just two major ones. Strictly speaking, there is contact and passing, followed by contact again. Just a normal walk cycle is still very challenging, and you might have to study different walking of people, do several walk cycles, for example 15 in a row, until you manage to make the one that you like. Let's position our camera appropriately, and in my case I'm gonna select the right foot controller, switch into select and move, switch into gimbal representation of the axis, and you can see that as we increase the value of Y position, that's gonna increase the value, moving the controller to the left of our current view. I'm going to Control Z that. I just showed it to you what happens as you increase the Y value in the gimbal representation. For your convenience, I'm going to be working in the right representation, so I'll press L, and then we'll rotate the cube a couple of times until I'm at the right representation. Because I have my right foot controller selected, it's displayed right here, controlling all of those parameters. Let's create the basis for our contact position. The animation might not look correct at this stage, but it will all combine nicely when all of our controllers are animated. Let's enter the auto key or press N, and with our controller selected, let's bring the frame count to 12. This is number 10, 11, 12. 12 is the middle of our animation, and I can demonstrate this by quickly closing the curve editor. Let's say 12 is the middle. First frame, second frame, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then the 0th is 12. So yes, indeed 12 is the middle of our animation, and the 0 is the first and the last frame. Let's open back our curve editor. With the right foot controller, bring it backwards. I would say to this amount. Select the left foot controller, then at frame 12, bring it forwards. Pick both of the controllers, add the previous controller to your current selection by pressing Ctrl left clicking, and you can see that we have now two objects, right foot controller with all of its parameters, and also the left foot controller containing the similar parameters, and we are currently interested in the transform's Y position of both objects. So for the left foot controller, let's select the Y position, and for the right foot controller above it, let's press Ctrl left click on the Y position. If we want to see what we have right now, we can grab this yellow line, drag it backwards. You can see that for the right foot controller, the position is increased at a smooth rate, bringing the foot controller to the right. The opposite stuff happens for the left foot controller, and it brings it in the negative Y direction, dropping it from 0 down to near 10 or 11. However, at frame 0, this should be a reflected pose of frame 12. So let's pick this controller, right click on this key, and then grab the value by double-clicking in this field, pressing Ctrl-C, and making sure that there is no minus in front. We can then switch to this controller, select the Y position curve, right-click on the key, and paste the value. Press Enter. Now we can right-click at the End 12 key, copy the position, and now it has minus, so beware, select it as well. Switch to the other controller, and at frame 0, make sure that the foot is mirrored to the same position as the left foot controller was. So grab the Y curve, right click on the key and paste in the value that is with a minus. We can now add the left foot controller to our selection and just select the Y position on both of the objects because that's what we care about. If I go into the right representation, orthographic one, I can zoom out and you can see what happens here. Observe how the feet controllers are starting to move and then slow down at the end. That's because the graph representations are not linear, their curves are not linear. Their type is a Bezier. We don't care about this now, but let's select the frames for both of the objects, the Y positions, at the start, then press Shift to duplicate it, and then drag it to the ending. Let's also press Ctrl while holding Shift to lock it into the horizontal position, just so that it's identical to the place where we copied it from, and then slide it to the right, to the frame 24. As explained before, frame 24 corresponds to frame 0. If we place it right here at frame 23, then as the animation progresses, we will have a hold between frame 23 and the frame 0, and nothing will occur visually. We want to drag it to frame 24 in order for this not to happen. As you can see, it's right now a very basic movement of feet, and we require it to be linear. Let's adjust it further, select everything, the Y curves for both of the controllers, then set their tangents to linear. If you don't have this panel, you can right-click here, show toolbars, and pick all the toolbars that you are lacking. For instance, you can click right here and detach it. It's called Key Tangents Track View. If we suddenly close it, right-click, show toolbars, Key Tangents Track View. You can then left-click it and dock it somewhere here. You can also undock the whole curve editor by clicking on the white line and docking it right here. So for instance, I have a different screen, and it's very handy for me to position my screen to the left of me or under this main screen, and then just drag it downwards or to the right to another screen and work from the curve editor on the left, while observing the clear picture on the right. However, because I have only one screen to show you and YouTube doesn't have a widescreen version or 2 or 3 screens version, I'm just gonna work from one screen. I'll dock it back into here and we'll readjust its size backwards just as it was before. Now our feet are bouncing. As soon as they reach the ending point, they will abruptly change their direction. That's because we don't have a smoothing curve. Our tangents are not Bezier anymore, they are linear. We want to have a loopable animation. For example, if we select all of those keys, press Ctrl and slide them to the left, you can see that we start at the center position where the feet are aligned correctly together, but as we scrub to the ending, the animation stays there because we did not specify what it should be at the ending points. So we cannot translate the animation leftwards and rightwards because the computer does not know what it should do. However, there is a very nice and neat fix to this. All we have to do is select the tracks that we want to control, for example, Y position for both of the objects, go into Edit right here, and select the controller out of range types. Currently, as you can see, it's constant for both the beginning and the ending. If you want to loop your animation backwards, you'll have to click on this icon right here. And if you want to have the ending to be loopable as well, you want to click here. Or to set them both at once, just simply click here. You can have different types, for example, loop, relative repeat, ping pong, etc. But for our case, just click on the cycle and press OK. As you can see, computer understands what should there be at the beginning and at the ending, and then it just loops it indefinitely, leftwards and rightwards. Now if we shift the animation to the left or to the right, it will still be unchanged forever in the visible representation, that is, in the visible scope. Let's place it back like it was, so at frame 0 it starts, and at frame 23 it ends, and then we can work further on with this. However, now we have an opportunity to offset the curve. Let's zoom in closer so that you can see what we are doing right here, and then select the 3 keys on top, 2 from the first controller and 1 from the curve of a second controller. Let's press Ctrl and then offset them by 3 keyframes. 1, 2, 3. Observe how the intersection points lay on the same level, right here. None of them is offset higher than the previous one. They're all at the same level. This intersection point means that the feet have exactly the same position. The feet controllers have the same value. If we would have frame right here, you would see them aligned perfectly. You will understand the significance of this offset slightly later. Basically, there should be a time for the character to roll over before he can lift his back feet forward. Right now it's very jiggly and kinda very strange. However, that's the right approach, which I sadly don't see in many animators' tutorials. Perhaps they don't know about it or just omit it. Further on, you can adjust the walk cycle type and the character. You can adjust the mood by changing such little things as, for example, this offset. We are working with the offset of 3, and I'll put it somewhere here just so that you remember. So offset to the right of 3. And also our middle frame is 12. Our ending frame is 23, and the start is 0. We can figure out which controller we're currently inspecting by looking at the curve as we scrub the animation. For example, as we go down, one of the controllers should stop moving in its direction and then change it immediately. As you can see, this left foot controller was moving forwards, but then, according to the curve, one of them should have moved backwards. and it was this controller, the left foot controller. So this curve clearly represents the left foot controller's Y position. This is the right ones. It's a very interesting and subtle change, but as this one changed the direction and started moving backwards, this one is still moving backwards. After 3 frames have passed, only then will it change its direction. And then at frame 0, when the right foot controller changes its direction, the left foot controller will still be moving back for 3 other frames, and only then will it start to move to the left. As well as that, notice that you can't work on the dotted line. To tweak the curve right here, you will have to adjust this key that's out of boundaries. If the last and the beginning key don't align, then you'll see this spike right here. That means that you have to align the beginning and the ending keys by simply selecting this one, pressing Ctrl-Shift, and duplicating this new key on the end spot at frame 27 in our case. If we zoom out, you can see that something strange happened, and that's because this key is not set to the linear representation. Make sure that all the keys are linear, like this. We'll be adjusting the ranges and the distances to which the legs travel further on as we work on the creature. Another interesting setting is that as the legs are traveling forwards, there's going to be a moment where it's going to hang. So as you fire your leg outwards, it will hang in there, or lag. In such place, where the foot is brought forwards, you have to add 2 more keys. One right here, and another one a frame later. Right-click to be able to move them, and select the 2 newly created keys. This one is at frame 11, and another one was positioned at frame 13, straight after the frame 12. So having selected both of them, we can set their representation to linear, or the tangents to linear, like this. This one, the middle one, can be set to the spline, and we can press Ctrl and drag it upwards. Then maybe let's zoom in slightly closer and see what happens there. We want it to be smooth. So let's press Shift, click on the black lines, and adjust the tangents so that we have a smooth curve. You don't want to be touching those 2 points, and you only want to adjust the center one. That way we have a smooth curve right here. That was the first controller, and now the second one has exactly the same thing, but between frames 23, frame 0, and frame 1. And that's this controller. We can click on it, select our Y position, then right-click, add keys, add a key at frame 23, and at frame 1. Right-click, move keys, set the newly created keys type to be linear, and the one at 24 and 0, make it to be spline. Press Ctrl and drag those 2 keys at the endings upwards like this. Select only this key, zoom closer on it by pressing Ctrl-Alt, middle mouse button of course, as explained in previous tutorial. Press Shift and adjust the tangent so that the curve is smooth. Drag it upwards a little bit. Notice the snap that happens here. That means we have a misunderstanding between the last frame and the first one, but that's fine because we didn't fix the first frame yet. That's exactly what we're gonna do right now. So having the curve ready, we can zoom out and switch to the first frame and adjust the curve right there as well. Adjust the key, get the curve that you want to have, and come back to fix the curve. If you have a snap in here, you can set this point's tangents to be spline as well. Just make sure that it doesn't modify the shape of the curve going to the left to the previous key right here. If it's all good, select the right side of the tangent by pressing Shift and adjusting only the right side. Notice the lag or slight slowdown of the feet that occurs on those 2 frames or those 3 frames. It does not bounce immediately, like for example this leg does right here. On this controller, the curve happens to be here, and the leg slows down on those 3 frames as it brought forward. Let's select both of our controllers once again. Zoom out appropriately and just pick to have Y position for both of the controllers. Now it's time to add a toe tip effect. Currently this is the right foot controller and that's the left one. On the right foot controller, let's go into its modified object, attribute holder, custom attributes, toe tip. You also want to have Y position selected. For the toe tip, let's right click, add the keys, and stick a key at the 0, then right click, move the keys, Control Shift, left click and drag all the way to frame 24, which is out of our boundaries. That's the place where our controller starts to move backwards. We want to have a maximum value of the toe tip 3 frames before that. 1, 2, 3. That's the place where the toe tip will have its maximum value for this controller. Select the first key, Control Shift, left click and drag to this frame. It's frame 12. And then let's drag it upwards until the leg is positioned correctly. You want to have it as straight as possible because that's the motion which helps the character or the human to push away from the ground and translate himself to the left or forwards. So straight leg, but it should be touching, and no artifacts should be within the foot. For example, if it's too low, you can see that the toes are not actually touching the ground. You want to create an illusion, and for that we're gonna increase the value up a bit until the leg starts to bend. Because we have IK controllers, this creates a problem because sometimes a very big snap can occur immediately after you increase the value by a tiny amount. See right here. That's the difficulty of working with IK chains, but hopefully we can avoid it. Now, we don't want to have our toe tip effect grow from the 0. We want to have it start out somewhere at 3 frames before the frame 12. Let's pick our 0th value at the start, Control Shift and drag it to this frame. Let's also duplicate this one to the end, and the ending should be at about 3 frames after frame 12. 1, 2, 3, so frame 15. That is, it grows from frame 9 all the way to 12, and then it starts to fade out until frame 15. The ending should be linear. That is, select this last key and set its value to be linear, and this one should have tangents set to spline. Press Shift, left click on the black arrow right here, or the black line, and make it linear. This one at the left side should be kind of linear, but it should be slopey right here, and then just abrupt linear change downwards. Make sure to save your work. Now let's select our toe tip curve, just the toe tip, right click and copy the curve. We are working with the right foot controller. Let's go down into the left foot's controller, go into Modified Object, Attribute Holder, Custom Attributes, Toe Tip, and then right click and paste the setting as a copy. Notice that both of the curves for the left foot controller and the right foot controller are identical. Once again, if we select the whole curve, control click and offset it to the left, it will not work because the out of range types have not been specified. The computer does not know how it should regard this curve. Let's Control Z that. With our toe tip curve selected, let's go into Edit, Controller, and out of range types. In fact, let's select all the parameters, including the heel. So just press here, shift click at the ending, maybe deselect the heel by pressing Control and left clicking on it, and also adding the Z position for this controller, and on another controller select all the parameters and the position as well. Then go into Edit, Controller, out of range types, and set all the parameters to be regarded as a cycle. That way you won't have to go to the Edit and set the out of range types for each of the tracks. So coming back to our previous curve that we've duplicated and pasted into this left foot controller, we can now safely offset it by the amount that we require. So our toe tip should begin somewhere at frame 22, then extend itself outwards until frame 1. 3 is the frame where the foot begins to move to the left, that is, being brought forward. And it should be the place where the value should be 0, so we need to offset it by 1 more space to the left. That is, at frame 0, the left foot controller's toe tip effect has the maximum value, which then fades out to the moment where the foot gets brought forward. And then it stays at 0 until frame 21, where it begins to increase for the 3 frames. If we loop the animation, you can see that this happens for both of the objects. If you want to compare how the two curves are working together, we can select the left foot controller's toe tip, scroll up to the right one, and perhaps press Control and left click to add the second toe tip curve to our selection. So the right foot controller's toe tip happens here, the maximum value, fades out, and then the left foot's controller toe tip grows up to its maximum value at frame 0, then fades out as well. Right foot controller, maximum value, fades out, Left foot controller maximum value fades out. As the foot controller's toe tip effect starts to go down, we want to bump up another effect called toe lift. That is, for this controller, the right foot controller, from the frame 12, where the toe tips effect is at maximum, we want to select a different parameter, toe lift. And just as a reference, let's add toe tip. For the toe lift, right-click, add the key to this curve. Let's right-click and move the key, and duplicate it to be at frame 15. Turn off our toe tip. Right here, the value should be at minimum, here at maximum, and then it should fade out into 0. Let's grab the ending key for our toe lift and bring it upwards like so. Remember, because we've set up our out-of-range types for all of the parameters, now the computer knows that this is a cycle and automatically makes it a cycle. Let's grab the beginning frame, Control-Shift-Drag it so that it grows up and then fades out. If we want to then have a value of 0 constantly till the ending, and the same for the beginning, we'll have to select this key, duplicate it to the beginning, and then grab this key, drag it to the ending, to the frame 24. Now if we select all the curves, we can offset it by as much as we want, and this will not change the loop internally, since it's just going to be offset. In our case, it should be fine like this. The toe tip effect fades out, while the toe lift grows in size. The toe lift does so to the moment where the foot starts to move backwards. So if I add the Y position, you can see that as soon as the position is changed, the toe lift effect starts to fade out into 0. But we will be adjusting this later. In here, this is exactly what you don't want to have. Look for this joint right here, the position of which gets altered with the value of this heel lift. So in my case, the toe lift effect is too big. So I'll select the ending key, then drag it downwards. As well as that, the beginning, the growth stage should be linear. That's why I'll select the beginning key, make it linear. And also this one should be set to spline. I'll grab this tangent with Shift left click, we'll make it linear, so that the tangent looks in the direction of the previous point. This one can be set and left as it is right now. We can change it always later. But the ending key perhaps should be slightly further on, like this. It fades out until frame 20, or does not matter right now, maybe frame 21. Because our toe lift curve starts from 0 and goes all the way till frame 24, which is out of range, we can copy it and then use it on another controller, but we just need to offset it. So let's click on the toe lift and copy this track into the buffer, then select the left foot controller, scroll down into the toe lift, right click and paste as a copy. And the toe lift is right here. The out of range bounds are set to be loopable, so we can select the whole curve and offset it so that it starts to grow at frame 0. At the frame 3, where the foot changes the direction, it begins to fade out. Here's what we have currently. We will later add the bumping of the body upwards and downwards a little bit, which will then require us to come back here and adjust several settings. And we will also add the swinging of the arms forwards and backwards. Notice how the joint starts to move. This value might be too big still. Let's maybe reduce it even more, so that the leg is staying straight. Or the other alternative is to select the Y position for this controller, select the beginning and the ending keys, then drag them upwards. Now this toe lift value has to be adjusted to be higher, and you can adjust it by either control and left click and dragging it upwards or downwards, or simply right click on the key and then adjust it to be bigger with the spinner. If you want to have a subtle change, press Alt, then click on the spinner to increase it by a minor change. You also might want to copy the value of this key, which corresponds to the value of the other one. Go into another controller, select the Y position, pick this key, and change the value to be that much. From the previous controller, let's also grab the value of the toe lift at its maximum, which is 6, and then a couple of zeros with a 6 at the end. Right-click on the toe lift for the other controller, stick a new value into it. In my case with this rig, I was not paying too much attention to the positioning of the bones within the mesh, so I require a different value here. Basically the one that has the leg remaining straight, maybe this one. Let's save our work. It's a very important moment, and while your toe tip effect is occurring, for example for this controller, it starts from this frame, goes all the way here. Through all of those frames your leg has to remain straight. Only then will it start to be bending in the knee, perhaps only at the maximum value of your toe lift. The way our feet work is that IK motion applies as long as the foot is on the ground. However, when it's brought upwards, it's the hip which is pushing it forwards. So we need to create an illusion that this bone is actually moving it forward, not the controller. The toe lift effect will fade out for about 6 frames until frame 21 for this controller, and the similar stuff happens for this leg as well. But in this case, in the case of this leg, it should remain straight all the way until frame 3, and only then should it start to be bending. That's why I've reduced the size downwards, like this. This is the setting with which you can play. However, we can always come back and return its value to be original or tweak it at any stage of our project. We're gonna throw a different parameter now, a heel lift. And the heel lift is occurring somewhere from here all the way until the foot is brought forward and begins to lag. Then it begins to fade out and the foot is placed firmly on the ground. It's called the heel lift. Notice that it should be always perpendicular to the shin, and if it's not, we have to adjust the settings. For instance, right here, it should be perpendicular, but I can actually see that it's not, and the foot is slightly tilted upwards incorrectly. And it's alright as long as we're working with a toe lift, but we should keep this in mind when we're working with a heel lift. We should not start it from somewhere here, because then the foot will begin to have this abrupt and acute angle, the sharp one. It should only initiate from the 0, somewhere from this point. Let's click downwards and upwards just so that we set a key right here for the heel lift for this controller. We can select the heel lift and maybe the Y position for this controller. Then grab this key that has been planted because we were tweaking this setting right here. Control Shift and left click and drag it to create a new key and position it at frame 12, where the foot starts to lag. That's the position and the point in time where the foot should have its heel lift to be at maximum. The foot should be straight at this point. It should not be bending in the knee. So this is a mistake. It should be straight like this, and then as the foot gets brought down, the setting should be at 0 somewhere here. So let's grab this frame and duplicate it to be somewhere here, like this. Let's also extend this duration to the ending so that the foot remains with 0 setting of heel lift all the way to the end, and then jumps back to the frame 0 with this 0 value as well, which will only start to increase at frame 8 in my case until frame 12. Because you want to have a straight leg, you want this key to be linear, this one's tangents to be spline. So let's shift and left click to adjust the spline to be looking directly at the previous frame. Let's press Ctrl S and save our work. And actually the toe lift effect should fade out slightly later on. We need a bigger angle right here, and we can do this by increasing our toe lift effect. For instance, it's ending right here, but I think it should be ending somewhere there. With that said, the toe lift and the heel lift have this relation where they overlap between frame 9 and 10 in my case. They are both working on the illusion that the hip bone is brought forward more than it used to before. The toe lift effect is at 0 only now, when the heel lift is at maximum. Well, this leg in my case, because of the geometry, is way too straight and kind of looking inwards, so I'll bump up the heel lift slightly. I'm just judging by the geometry right now, not the bones. Similar stuff will happen for the other controller, but I prefer to do it manually, and although I could have copied the curves, I'll do it manually by hand. So the range of fading out for the toe lift is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 frames. This should be preserved in here as well. So the toe lift should have 9 frames of fading out. 15 plus 9 is 24. And it should fade out all the way until the 0th frame, where the heel lift will be at maximum. Let's throw in our heel lift. Right-click, add the key into here. Right-click, move key, copy it to the right, all the way till frame 24. And let's see, it should initiate somewhere here. Maybe here as well, to indicate the fading out ending. Then drag the beginning and the end keys and bring them upwards like this. So at this frame, the heel lift starts to increase. That's too much. So we will reduce it by either right-click and changing the value, dragging the keys up or down, or maybe just altering it with the Alt left-click and clicking on the spinner right here to equalize the setting. At point of time 0 and ending, you want to have a straight leg, because that's where your heel lift is at maximum. However, now there is a mismatch between the two keys, and you can see this because of the snap that occurred here. We can duplicate and spread this change to the ending frame by duplicating this key, bringing it here, and now we have everything perfect. Notice how the foot lags in here. Try to remember why is it so. That's a test for you. The foot lags here because we've adjusted the Y position curve to have a smooth ending right here. The foot controller lags in here because there are 3 similar frames which have very similar position value, as opposed to this place right here, where the foot controller is brought to the right and then abruptly changes the direction because it's linear change. It slows down right here, lags a little bit, and then abruptly changes at frame 15. That's the stage called contact, and the ending one contributes to it. But at frame 0 we have contact, somewhere at frame 6 we have the passing frame, 6 frames later we have a contact, and then 6 frames later we have a passing point again, and then contact at frame 0. Now we will add the bouncing of the body upwards and downwards to create an illusion that the character is actually shifting his weight from one side to another one. And so in order to create this bumping motion of going up and down, we will be working with a pelvis controller, those 2 boxes that are fused into one controller. Right now our main concern is its rotation around the Z-axis in the gimbal representation, and also going up and down. Let's begin with the rotation first. We're going to extend the range slightly for each leg as it's thrown forwards. We're going to do this with the auto key set on. In the gimbal representation, let's rotate it forward in the Y-axis horizontally like this, with the angle snap turned down by about 15 degrees. If we go into the rotation, 0 Euler XYZ, Y rotation, we can see that the value has been brought upwards, but nothing has been placed there, no key. That's alright, because on frame 12, we're going to rotate it by 30 degrees in the opposite direction. Now we have an equal offset, positively and negatively. We would also want to select the first key and duplicate it to the end, to the frame 24. Don't forget that we didn't set up the out of range parameters. The curves aren't looping yet. So let's select the rotation along with position, the 0 position XYZ for all the 6 tracks right here. Going to edit, controller, out of range types, and let's make them loopable. Notice that the rotation should not occur until this frame, where the leg gets lifted off. Otherwise we create an illusion that the leg is thrown off with the body. That can be adjusted, and that can be used for sure to set up the mood of the walk. However, in our case, it should be synchronized with the movement of the leg. And the same story happens here, where the keys should be offset by 3 as well. Maybe the whole graph should be offset backwards by 1, just so that the motion originates at the pelvis. Notice, it begins the rotation 1 frame before the controller begins to move. Also notice the smoothing type, it's Bezier. We're not using linear in here, and that is because we want to achieve a smooth transition from left to right. Be careful and make sure that the critical points are both positive and negative. If you would leave this key right here at the 0, that would result in only one directional twisting of the body. You can see how it behaves right here. It goes from the center to the left, back to center and back to the left. We don't want this. We want to make sure that everything is equal and we get equal twist both to the left and to the right. Let's go into the left representation and check how our legs behave. Clearly right here we have to adjust the toe lift effect because the knee joint begins to slide out from the body actually 3 frames before the controller starts to move, and this is bad. So for this controller, for the toe lift effect, we want to actually decrease it to about this much. Switching to another controller, we're going to repeat the procedure if it's necessary. And yes, you can see that the knee remains in place, and this is not what we want for almost 3 frames before the controller begins to move in another direction. We want it to be moving slightly backwards with the leg, and that can be achieved if we reduce down the toe lift effect. This preserves the pushing effect and illusion, resulting in a more correct walk cycle. However, if you make it too shallow, for example like this, then as soon as you start to return the leg, you might have a snap in the motion, and you want to have a gradual shift as the leg is brought forwards. So I think this value right here is the golden ratio for me, at least. You can see that the leg is gently brought upwards and the knee does not snap between those 3 frames. For this walk cycle, I think I might have overestimated the boundaries for the Y position for each of the controllers, and actually they should not maybe go as far backwards. But we can adjust this, and then this will require adjusting the toe lift effect and the toe tip values as well. That is, we could have brought the maximum value to be slightly lower, somewhere here. But then we would want to tweak this knee animation and knee position to be straight in this pose, which would require us obviously to reduce the toe lift and the toe tip effects. It's required to adjust the knee swivel, but we will do it later on, during the final stage. Having done the rotation for the pelvis, let's now see how it's going to be moving along the Z-axis. With the pelvis controller selected, let's only pick the Z position track, and this is the setting that will actually pressure the values of other parameters within the whole structure, so we will have to readjust them later on as we tweak this one. I was observing many walk cycles, and I noticed that the pelvis moves downwards during those 3 frames, when the backwards foot is still rolling over and the front foot is rolling over to a firm pose. This is the place where the pelvis will be at the lowest point. Let's add a key into this position, right click, move the keys, and drag it downwards. It is 3 because of the way we've offset our Y curves in the beginning of the lesson. From frame 3 all the way until frame 9, the height will be returning back to its original state. It will remain so for about 3 frames, and then the whole story happens over again. Instead of adding new keys, we can select already the trough from here, the 3 keys, press Ctrl Shift, and duplicate it with the same value, like this. If I don't like something, for example, those 3 keys I think should begin slightly earlier, we can grab them and adjust their position to be starting earlier. Changing the settings of the pelvis now requires us to return back to the feet and adjust the controls. In particular, I'm worried about the situation right here, where the character plants his leg like this, but I think it's happening too close to the body. That's why I will select both of the controllers. We'll select only the Y position curve for both of the objects, and for their furthest value to the right, I'll bring it downwards. Notice that now I'm working in the left view, not in the right one, so we're on the other side of the coordinate system, if you will. For the leg as well, we might want to tweak around with the toe lift and the heel lift effect to have an illusion of the leg being lifted above from the ground. For example, for this controller, we can tweak around the settings that I've discussed a second ago with you, select the toe lift, the heel lift as well, and if you drag the toe lift to the right, you can create an impression of the leg being lifted forward. That will allow us to bring the controller to the right more. Let's select its Y curve, and then decrease the value downwards. That might be a little bit too much. Now we have to adjust the heel lift as well. Heel lift is right here, and in our case we need to have a bigger value. Maybe the toe lift should have ended slightly earlier so that the leg is straight but still is lifted above the ground. As for the heel lift, it should end slightly later because we want the feet to be remaining perpendicular to the ground. We can do the same thing for the other controller. Let's go over this once again. Because I want to extend the range of this foot to be moved forward more, I'm going to select the lower keys, drag them downwards. This will result in a very unstraight leg, so we will have to tweak around with the toe lift and the heel lift effects. The toe lift should be ending slightly later, so I will select both of the keys on the end of the curve and will drag it to the right. This lifts up the heel from the ground, and now we can lift the toes by increasing the value of the heel lift to be larger. Make sure to do this both at the start and at the ending position. If the leg is still straight, that means you have to increase the range of the toe lift even more. The heel lift should start earlier, and I'll select its beginning frame so that it has its value already bigger at this stage. There you go. Clearly the heel lift should be bigger at this point of time, so I'll select the key where it begins to grow and we'll actually drag it earlier so that at this point of time the value is already big enough. So this is some kind of happy walk. You can tweak around those settings and get the required results, but you can already see that changing those parameters creates and enhances the mood of the walk. The height from the ground of your foot depends on the level of intersection and the height that this intersection occurs at. So if you want to bring the foot downwards, you can change its height by selecting the end key for your toe lift. Because it's split into two, you have to select both of them at the start and at the end of the loop. And then we can bring it to the left. I might have actually done too much work on the Y position, so I will return it back closer to the 0, like this. I just want you to understand that the position of this knee joint is the relation between the toe lift, the heel lift, and the value that the Y curve for this controller has at this instance of time. By tweaking those, you can adjust the angle and the position of this knee joint the way you like to. Don't forget that the growing of the heel lift should occur linearly. That's why we'll select those two keys and make them linear. The same story happens on the previous controller. Now let's see what happens when our feet are brought backwards. How did our pelvis affect it? Let's select this controller, and you can see that the knee starts to bend 3 frames before the foot actually changes the direction. That's bad, so we need to reduce the setting. Let's see which one it is. It is the toe tip. Let's bring it downwards. The leg should be straight. And we also need to tweak some of the tangents. So straight, and then begins to bend. You can in fact imagine this knee joint to be moving and slowing down, kind of lagging before changing the direction. The same thing happens on the other controller. So we'll pick it and then select the toe tip. Yes, 3 frames before the controller starts to change the direction, the knee bends too much, and this is bad. We'll select the highest value and we'll bring it downwards. That's nice. Having a look at the knee, we can see that it's slowing down at the end before moving forwards. This preserves and keeps the notion of moving and pushing the ground away from you in order to move forwards. Of course, another relation is that you could have moved your leg backwards, but then you would require to increase the toe lift to a maximum amount, for example like this, all the way to 10. But that allowed you to move the controller even more backwards, if you want to have big strides instead of small footsteps. We can now create a swinging animation for the arms, and because we've frozen the transforms at the beginning, we're going to be avoiding the gimbal lock that could have occurred if we would bring the arms downwards without freezing them, and then started to animating them swinging backwards and forwards. But you know how to do this, and I'm going to jump straight into animating the pose of the creature that's more suitable to the mutant. We've already got the walk cycle ready, so make sure to save it under a new name. Let's save it as mutant leg walk cycle as a max file. My zombie is definitely not going to be walking straight like normal human would, and so I'll grab his pelvis with the auto key turned off. We'll bring it downwards. I just want to outline to you what will happen to the Z position curve. So I'll zoom out slightly, and without the auto key turned on, I'll bring the default position of the pelvis to be lower. Notice that the whole curve has been brought down. If I would be in auto key, that would have planted the key in exactly this position, and we would have a different curve with a big trough in here. Because we're creating now a zombie walk, I would suggest grabbing the chest turn, and without the auto key turned on, simply bring the default position to be downwards like this. To me it seems that he has to hump more, that's why I'll select both of the shoulder controllers, and without the auto key turned on, I'll bring the shoulder controllers downwards in the gimbal representation. Maybe slightly forwards. Without the auto key turned on, I will set up my controllers like so, to their default position, and I can do this in the world representation. In fact, it's going to be much easier, because after this I'll freeze the transforms, or freeze the rotations for this controller, in order to have a clear gimbal representation of the axis. You'll see in a second. Basically the same thing as we did at the beginning of the video. I want to increase the X value slightly so that the arms do not crash into the body. Alt right click on this controller and freeze the rotation so that the gimbal representation is aligned with the pivot point of this controller, because currently it might be offset incorrectly. Freeze rotation. Let's grab this controller, go into rotation, keyframe XYZ, Z rotation. With the auto key turned on, I'm going to bring this arm backwards, and then at frame 12, I'll bring it forwards. Remember to work in the gimbal representation at this stage. That might be too much, so I'll bring this key downwards so that the action is not too exaggerated. Let's grab the first key and bring it to frame 24. Then, as always, with all of those 3 tracks, let's go into Edit, Controller, Out of Range Types, and as always make it a cycle. We can now select the whole curve and offset it by 3 frames. And actually, the arm should start to swing before the leg. The whole curve must be offset maybe by just 1 frame to the right. So I'll bring it back 2 frames. If you look closely, here it's the Z-axis, and right here it will be the Y-axis, the green one, not blue. We will return back to this controller, select this track, right-click and copy, then pick this controller go into rotation, keyframe XYZ, Y rotation, we'll right click on it and we'll paste the new curve as a copy. If your arm got flipped upwards like this probably means that the whole curve is way below the point which you want it to be at. So you would select the whole curve and would bring it to the point where you want it to be. In my case, it's close to 0, like this. Also, let's add the motion at the elbows. Let's first create the basic motion and then we will offset the curves to create a latency as well as to add the sense of inertia. So this is going to be the Z-axis. Let's go into rotation, 0 Oil XYZ, Z rotation. With the auto key turned on, let's go to frame 12, where the arm is brought forwards. Actually, 12 plus 2 frames, because we've offset the first controller by 2 frames. So that's going to be frame 14. And in here, we're going to give the bigger value for the arm to be somewhere here. Then, at the Z rotation's first key, let's Control Shift and drag it to the end, outside of the boundaries once again. It, of course, cannot go below 0, because otherwise the arm would appear to be broken, like so. It's incorrect, but it actually can be slightly below. That should be fine. This creates a stretch and squash effect as well. With the Z rotation taken, because we're not going to be animating in Y or the X, since your elbow only bends in one direction, with the Z rotation, let's go into Edit, Controller, Out of Range Types, and set the cycle. This was too exaggerated. Maybe it's exaggerated right here as well, so let's reduce the peak downwards. Also, to enhance this with an appearance of inertia, let's select the whole curve and offset it forwards so that it's kind of lagging by 2 frames. You can see that these shoulders bring in the whole arm downwards, but the bend is still occurring for 2 more frames. Maybe actually let's do it by 3 frames. You can see the tiny movement right here. Do the same thing on this controller. Offset its curve, the Z curve, by 3 frames. Let's experiment and see what happens if it's by 6 frames. Yeah, you can see that the inertia is very big, especially on the part where it's extending under the elbow like this. Let's move it by 5 frames, and here it should be by 5 frames as well. Press E to rotate, and in the gimbal representation of the axis, if you don't see them, press X or Shift X, I believe, or Control Shift X in 3ds Max 2014. Then, without the auto key turned on, let's just rotate them backwards like this. With the wrist FK controller, let's go into its Z rotation. Here it kinda should be flipped outwards like this. Notice that I'm doing this with the auto key turned on. At the frame 14, the value should be decreased to about that much. Maybe even more. Then I'll select the beginning point and we'll translate everything to the end. We'll also go into Edit, Controller, Out of Range Types, and of course make it cycle. I'll select those 2 things, and because 14 is not 12, it's offset by 2, I will also offset the peaks to the right by 2. At frame 14 for this wrist, I'll make it flap outwards like this. At frame 0, which will be then translated to the right by 2 frames, I'll leave it as it is, maybe we'll decrease the value slightly more. Copy to the frame 24, which is outside of the boundaries. As always, Edit Controller, Out of Range Types, Cycle. Grab the bottom peaks and offset them by 2 frames. Because this top controller is setting up the movement for the whole arm, this one lags a little bit. This one can lag even more, so we can offset it even more to the right, the whole Z curve. Let's experiment. For this controller's Z-curve, let's offset it as well. In it, everything should be happening later. That's why we'll bring it to the right. If you want to, of course you can animate the fingers, but you know how to do it and I'm not gonna show you because you're already familiar and know the principles. I went ahead and made everything visible, that is our bones and the controllers, everything that this body is being controlled by, because we're nearly ready to export everything into Unity. Just a final glance at our animation, and you can see that I've animated the head via the head controller. If you're interested to see how it's working, it's nothing special. Let's open up the curve editor. In the gimbal representation for the rotation, you can see that it's a Z rotation, in my case, which is going up and down, like this. I'm not going for anything really special, just for a default bobbing of the head specific to this walk cycle. This is because we're going to be exporting separate animations in order to be blending them between each other at runtime in Unity. For example, different twisting of the head to the left or to the right can be overlaid on top of this one. However, here, the default rotation of the head should be as simple as that. I'm not going to be animating facial expressions here, although you could have done it, and then that would have saved you some space on the animation clips. But this one is going to be a pure walk cycle, on top of which I'm going to be adding different facial expressions and then blending several stuff from other animation clips. Just to make it clear, here is what we have. Currently we got a walk cycle animation and we will export it as a special FBX file. We will also animate just the head from the previous saves of our work, where the rest of the geometry, rest of the bones are simply at their transform positions. They are not animated. Anything but the head is stationary. And also a second one, where we rotate our head to the left, and then we add a different facial expression. I will also add another animation, for instance, waving of the hand. As you could have guessed, all of those 4 animations will be exported via the separate FBX files, so you have 4 of them at the end. You only need to export an animation if it's different from the previous ones. Exporting the animations via separate FBX files is one strategy, but another one is to export one FBX file where on the timeline you depict different animations, one after another. This kind of collage of animations can be split later on in Unity into separate animations, and you'll save yourself a lot of space in terms of FBX file size format. However, here, just for the simplicity, I export everything into separate 4 FBX files, although it would be much more wise to export everything via one FBX file, where my walk cycle, head rotations, facial animations, and expressions are animated on a single time range, and then later we could split them in Unity. If you want to, you can actually take a very different approach and create an interactive facial expression only inside of Unity. For instance, what I'm talking about here is you can keep all the bones at their 0th transform position and only animate the upper eyebrows, for example, lift them upwards, separate animations for moving upper and lower cheeks in all different positions, and then blend all of those variations and separate animations to create a single procedurally generated facial expression that combines the movements of Mutant's muscles on his face in various ways. Keeping this in mind, we are ready to export our figure. Press H, and from the selection set, pick Export Figure, the one that we made right after our face rig, before we started any animations, and press OK. We can now export the selection in the folder with our character, or in our Unity Projects folder, into the required one where the mutant was exported. This one will go into the Mutant Guy folder, into the Animations, under a name as mutant at walk cycle, basically just as we named our max file. But this one is going to be the FBX. So mutant walk cycle is fine. Save as type FBX in the animations folder. At will ensure that our animation clip or the animation walk cycle will be named as walk cycle and not animation 1 or whatever garbage there might be. It's going to be a clean walk cycle name of our animation file. in the mutant at walk-cyle FBX file that we'll be importing into Unity. Click Save. Here are the options that we require. We need the smoothing groups. We don't require turbo smooth. Make sure that you don't have selection sets, because why would you need them in Unity? Animation, make sure you have this ticked on. Bake animation should be turned on as well, from frame 0 all the way till the ending, which is frame 23 for us. Step 1, don't resample. You need deformations skins, but you don't require morphs. You don't need curve filters, because those are, for instance, if you would put noise on your curves, it's like special filters that deform your curve based on mathematical formulas. We didn't use them, and we just rely on normal tangents and normal smoothing and interpolation of curves, so don't tick this. Don't point cage the files, because Unity doesn't support it anyways. That's where you would be storing position of each vertex, specifically in a separate file, so you don't require it. Unity doesn't support it. You don't require cameras, don't require lights, don't embed media because we don't have any kind of materials. In advanced options, make sure that units are not automatic and that they are centimeters, so that the scale in Unity as we bring this file is going to be 1:1 and not 1/10 as some people do. Also, very important, make sure that y-axis is the up one, so select y up here, because Unity works with the y up and 3ds Max works with the z up. Type binary FBX 2013, and if you're working with a 3ds Max 2014 version, still export it as 2013, I would advise you. This exported our figure under an FBX file type format, and it can be brought to Unity. However, I want to create several of other animations, and for that, just as explained before, I'm going to come back into our mutant base file of Max, from which all the animations will be originating, and we'll save another Max file specifically for another animation from that one to create different ranges of movement or maybe facial expressions for our character. Then we'll bring them to Unity and we'll be blending between them to demonstrate how it's working. We will be learning how to script those events in a further series, so don't worry, you'll learn it in the near future. As you can see, I've imported two of the FBX files. The first one is called mutant at arms, and the second one is mutant at walk-cyle. Each one has an appropriate animation clip with the same name as is stated after the at sign. If this name wouldn't contain at sign, then this animation clip would be called something as take 1 or take 002. We can either use the animations from those FBX files with the at signs on the normal FBX model, for example simple mutant, and that would require us to import the FBX file with the skeleton where the bones are at their 0th transform, and then we could simply make use of the animations from our FBX files to drag on this base FBX file. However, I'm still dragging this FBX file into the scene, and so our object in the scene will be named not the clean mutant name, but slightly more complex one, mutant at arms. That will do for our example. By default, this prefab will contain a default animation called arms, which lasts exactly 23 frames. And in it, I've animated the arm to be raised upwards. And I can overlay this animation with the simple walk-cyle that is present here. From this file, we're getting the walk-cyle. From this one, I've animated the arm being raised. I've also coded my script, and we will be looking at it in the further lessons after I've taught you some of the C# coding. But without looking at the details of my script, it requires some mixing transform, for instance, the shoulder, up to which the animation will be played on the rest of the body. For example, if I click on mutant arms, it contains my script, the A script, which takes in a shoulder value in which I should have placed my shoulder bone, and from there the shoulder bone controls the upper arm, the forearm, the wrist and all of the fingers. That chain, starting from the shoulder bone, will adhere to the animation called arms after I press the button. Otherwise, we're going to be playing walk-cyle on the whole skeleton and the arm as well. Have a look at this. When I hit play and press W, we start to animate our character, but when I press E, the arm is brought upwards, and again, and again. That way we can blend our animations and create nice transitions and the more complex animations. We can blend facial expressions, where we mix movements of different muscles from the face, insert head turns into our walk-cyle, and even control the rotation of the head with the mouse if we require to do so. Here you can see a slightly more complex example of animation blending to create facial expressions procedurally. As you can see, the face responds to me pressing the buttons, and I can create several of the facial expressions just by combining those separate animation clips. To add to this, I exported this file as a single FBX file with all of the animations side by side on a single timeline. That way I've saved myself a lot of space on the hard drive. And then in Unity, when I brought this FBX file, I chopped this long animation into shorter animation clips and created the animations, which you can see me blending here by pressing separate buttons. I can create a roaring animation without the grin, so the central part stays unchanged. I can open mouth in different positions, for example to the left or to the right, and I can add any kind of eyebrows effect if I want to that. Of course, you can see that this technique brings a huge potential, so make sure to use it. It's working from a slightly more complex script, which we will learn in a future tutorial. It combines the principles of animation mixing and animation blending that Unity provides. All of that will be considered in the following tutorials, and I would like to now conclude this one. Today we've learned a lot of techniques and have all the potential to create nice animations to be used by game designers. It's a very artistic topic, just as most of 3D. You'll have to practice a lot and create many clips until you've mastered it. The scope of this series is to motivate people to create games, to show that there is nothing to be afraid of in this process. The way the information is presented here is via giving it part by part, starting from a novice level, taking you towards the advanced, and then to expert level, where we are currently at. It takes a lot of time to edit each tutorial until you see it as right now. Add the studying at uni, and you get a very busy schedule. You can thank me by dropping a like, subscribing to my channel and sharing my tutorials with people who enjoy games development just as me and you. The core of the next part will be already in Unity. My name is Igor Aherne, and you've completed part 7 of how to create a horror game. Congratulations on this milestone, and I hope to see you in the following series. Have a nice day.